The Submarine, a metallic marine fighting machine. Lean and mean, it torpedoed the Queen and her navy. In fact, Nazi submarines, commonly known as U-boats, sank as many as 5,000 ships during World War I, killing upwards of 15,000 sailors. Another 175 warships and 3,000 merchant ships were torpedoed and sunk in World War II. The deadly wolf pack, as they came to be known due to their swarming tactics, were a brutally effective menace to ships and life with their practice of unrestricted submarine warfare. Of course, these wolves of the sea and their Nazi cohorts didn't pioneer submarining. In fact, its foundations may be millennia old. Aristotle, the ancient Greek scholar, related in 332 BC how Alexander the Great descended into the sea using a primitive diving bell. As Aristotle described it,
"They enable the divers to respire equally well by letting down a cauldron, for this does not fill with water, but retains the air, for it is forced straight down into the water."
The first recorded reference to a self-propelled submarine was sketched by the genius Leonardo da Vinci around 1515, and the first actual plans were devised by British mathematician William Bourne. His design, published in 1578, was the first self-propelled underwater vessel, a small oar-powered submarine. But it wasn't until 1620 that Dutch inventor Cornelius van Drebbel endeavoured to build a submarine using Bourne's design plans. Drebbel's submarine was protected with greased leather and powered by rowers pulling on oars that protruded through flexible leather seals in the hull. Snorkel air tubes reached above the surface with floats, which allowed the boat to be submerged for several hours. It successfully navigated at depths of 12 to 15 feet below the surface and stayed submerged for 3 hours. Despite consistently successful tests, it never aroused the Navy's interest enough to use it in combat. And, as with many of that period's priorities, military objectives were the driving force behind submarine development. The first submersible, specifically intended for use in war, was designed and built by American inventor David Bushnell in 1775 during the American Revolutionary War. The vessel Bushnell envisioned was to carry and attach an underwater mine to an enemy vessel's bottom hull. To raise and submerge the vessel, the operator flooded the air-filled chamber with water, making it heavier or lighter, while a vertical propeller on the top of the boat assisted with ascent. To propel the boat forward and backward, a front propeller was employed operated by foot pedals and a hand crank. These two propellers that Bushnell invented and described as oars, and, like the blades of a windmill, were a significant contribution to future submarine development. The vessel was designed to travel on the surface or with its hatch and windows above water. It would only submerge to avoid detection and affix the mine. A critical innovation in 1747 by Nathaniel Symons was the use of ballast for submersion and ascension. The design used leather bags that could fill with water to submerge the craft and a mechanism to twist the water out of the bags and cause the boat to resurface. With proof of concept in place, submarine innovation began to gain pace. Over a dozen patents for submarines, submersible boats, being granted in England by the mid-18th century. The next noteworthy addition to submarine development was brought forth by Robert Fulton, the renowned inventor of the steamboat. But Fulton's true passion was to nullify currently overwhelming sea power by means of submarine warfare. Like David Bushnell in 1775, he believed that the most effective way to maneuver an explosive charge under a warship was by means of a submarine. In this case, his original design, known as the Nautilus, was constructed of metal as opposed to the previous wooden designs, and is commonly referred to as the first modern submarine. In a prescient quote at the time, reflecting the stealthy, unstoppable threat and power of today's nuclear-powered military submarines, it was said,
"The arm conceived by Citizen Fulton is a terrible means of destruction, because it acts in silence and in a manner almost inevitable."
Designed between 1793 and 1797, it incorporated lasting innovations such as its cigar-shaped hull and an observation dome somewhat similar in appearance to the conning tower of today's submarines. It employed a hand-powered four-bladed propeller with a rudder for steering. The hollow iron keel was the vessel's ballast tank, flooded and emptied to change buoyancy. When surfaced, a fan-shaped collapsible sail reminiscent of those popular on Chinese ships could be deployed. Air, beyond that enclosed within the vessel, could be provided by a snorkel constructed of waterproofed leather. Fulton took the Nautilus down to the then remarkable depth of 25 feet. With his 3 crewmen and 2 candles burning, he remained for an hour without difficulty. He also discovered that compasses worked underwater exactly as on the surface. Following the venerable Fulton came Wilhelm Bauer in 1850 with his fire diver Brandtaucher submarine, which is the oldest surviving submarine today. Again, the aim was to affix the mine to the underside of enemy ships while remaining undetected. Remarkably, Bauer nearly drowned when demonstrating his first design after it sunk in 50 feet of water. Only after several hours did the increased air pressure from the leaking submarine allow the crew to open the hatch and escape to the surface. His ultimate design was the Sea Devil, a 52-foot submersible capable of carrying a crew of a dozen. The ship boasted several technological breakthroughs, including multiple ballast tanks for added buoyancy, a crewed airlock, and a propeller that was powered by crewmen operating an internal treadmill. The Sea Devil would reach a depth of 150 feet with over 130 dives before it became stuck in a mud bank where it remained. Luckily, the crew escaped once again. Submarine advancements continued with the Ictineo 1 and 2, developed by Narcís Monturio from 1859 through 1867. The name was derived from Greek and means fish boat. Interestingly, his motivation was not militaristic. It was safety for coral harvesters after witnessing the death of one. Revolutionary innovations included the first light hull design with individual inner and outer shells. The inner hull was ellipsoidal shaped for strength, while the outer hull was streamlined and fish-shaped to reduce water drag. It also contained 4 bladders serving as ballast tanks using valves to admit water for submersion and pumps to force in air for ascent. His pioneering second revision was the first air-independent and machine-propelled submarine. On the 22nd of October 1867, the Ictineo 2 made its first surface journey using a chemically powered anaerobic or air-independent steam engine. The engine was powered by a chemical mixture which reacted to generate heat and, conveniently, oxygen. It disappointed with a relatively slow speed of 2.5 knots, but it dove 90 feet and could stay underwater for 7.5 hours. Despite best attempts, the submarine couldn't find suitable investors and was eventually dismantled and sold for scrap to meet debt obligations from its development. Simultaneous to Ictineo's introduction was development of the Plungeur, French for diver. It was launched in 1863 and was the first submarine in the world to be propelled by mechanized power by using compressed air contained in 23 tanks and a reciprocating piston engine. The submarine was armed with a ram to break holes in the hull of enemy ships and an electrically fired pole-borne torpedo. A model of Plungeur was displayed at the 1867 Exposition Universelle, where it was studied by Jules Verne, who used it as an inspiration for his novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. In 1862, the US Navy constructed the USS Alligator, coined so due to its green colour. It was the first operational submarine with the capability for a diver to leave, affix a mine, and return while both remained submerged. It went through 2 revisions, the first with 16 oars whose slow speed was too vulnerable to enemy and weather, so these were replaced with a hand-cranked propeller. With air supplied from the surface by 2 tubes with floats connected to an air pump inside the submarine, it was the first operational submarine to have an air purifying system. Despite hopeful plans, the sub encountered heavy weather under tow, where it sank and remains to this day, exact whereabouts unknown. While the Union Navy was constructing its first submarine, the USS Alligator, the Southern Confederacy was developing its own in Alabama in 1863. This was H.L. Hunley, which played a small but significant role in the history of the American Civil War. It gained the distinction of being the first combat submarine to sink a warship, the USS Housatonic, which was blockading the city of Charleston's harbour. After attaching a spar torpedo to the ship's hull, As the HL Hunley backed away, the bomb exploded, sinking the war sloop and 5 Union souls with it. The Hunley, however, failed to return to port, its whereabouts unknown for over 100 years until its discovery off the city of Charleston's harbour. Researchers surmise that the submarine wasn't able to establish enough distance from the torpedo bomb, likely less than 20 feet, to escape its deadly repercussions, and her crew of 8 was killed instantly. Indeed, the HL Hunley carried a deadly past with 2 previous crews having met their demise on previous trial sessions, totalling 21 lost in all, including Hunley himself. Another Civil War addition was the pseudo-submarine, the CSS David, infamous for its partially successful attack on the ironclad ship USS New Ironsides, which was participating in the blockade of Charleston in 1863. It was designed to be only partially submerged, operating on dark nights and using smokeless coal and a boiler with stack always protruding above the surface. The CSS David was nearly as hard to see as a true submarine. Researchers trying to locate the sub's remains, following old photographs and using ground-penetrating radar, located anomalies consistent with what would be expected of a historical wreck under modern-day Trad Street, so no excavations were performed. Another advancement in early submarine technology arrived in 1888 with the Peral. Built by the Spanish Navy, it was the first fully military-capable submarine. Her hull shape, propeller, periscope, torpedo launcher, air regeneration, and turret anticipated later submarine design. It was also the first fully electric-powered propulsion system with batteries weighing 30 tons. The drawback was its inability to charge her batteries while underway, and while its speed was high, its range was limited. It was also the first submarine to incorporate a fully reliable underwater navigation system. In June 1890, Peral's submarine launched a torpedo while submerged. Her operational abilities have led some to call her the first U-boat. Despite 2 years of successful tests, negotiations for a subsequent build failed, and the Peral was withdrawn from service. Around the same time, France was developing a similar all-electric submarine named the Gymnote. She was scuttled in the early 1900s after a hatch was accidentally left open, and she sank. Also, the Gustaf Zede, using a design based on the Gymnote, was performing war exercises and carried out the first successful torpedo attack by a submerged vessel against a surface ship. The culmination of all the efforts and advancements that occurred over the prior several hundred years can be found in the USS Holland, a US Navy sub commissioned in 1900. The Holland included many of the features that future submarines of the early 20th century would incorporate. It had a conning tower from which the boat and her weapons could be directed, and ballast and trim tanks to make navigational changes at a depth of 75 feet. She was propelled by both a combustion engine and battery power, and sported 3 powerful torpedoes. The US government soon ordered more of these submarines, which were termed the Plungeur class, eventually becoming America's first fleet of underwater naval vessels. Having found their place in warfare, and later in exploration, submarines continued to evolve, from the German U-2 subs that wreaked havoc on shipping lanes in World War I and World War II, to today's undetectable, globally destructive nuclear subs. Other short-lived designs of note were the first submarine with a screen door introduced by the Polish Navy in 1951, and the popular Yellow Submarine, first active in 1968, but scuttled by 1970. In summary, we've determined that a submarine is a lean, mean, sneaky machine.